Imagine meeting someone who seems too good to be true, a man who's confident, well-spoken, maybe even a little mysterious. He tells you he's a doctor, or maybe he's a lawyer, or a high-level government consultant. You believe him. Why wouldn't you? He's got the charm, the credentials, the convincing smile. But now, imagine learning that everything you knew about him was a lie. Not just his job, not just his name, his entire identity, fabricated. And here's the catch, he didn't just do it once. He didn't just slip into a new persona to escape a bad decision. No, he did it again. And again. 3 lives. 3 complete transformations. 1 terrifying truth. Because behind each carefully crafted identity was not just a conman running from his past, but a murderer. A man capable of manipulating those closest to him, exploiting trust like currency, and using love as a leash. And while the world saw a polished professional, behind the scenes, he was orchestrating a web of lies that ended in cold-blooded death. This is the story of Paul Steven Mack. A man who wore masks so well, even his victims didn't see the danger until it was too late. His trail spans decades, crossing state lines, identities, and lives, leaving behind shattered families, missing women, and one of the most haunting psychological profiles in American true crime. So fasten your seatbelt, because what you're about to hear isn't just a case of murder. It's a labyrinth of deceit. A psychological maze built by a man who refused to be known, until it was far too late. Welcome back to The Crime Keeper, your destination for exploring the darkest corners of the human mind. Here, we don't just recount crimes, we dissect them. We peel back the layers of lies, ego, and pathology to reveal the twisted inner workings of real-life monsters. These are not just criminals. These are architects of manipulation, masters of deception. And today, we present a case that redefines the art of hiding in plain sight. Meet Paul Steven Mack. On the surface, a smooth-talking professional. The kind of man who commanded a room not with force, but with calculated charisma. He didn't need violence to draw people in. He had charm, intelligence, the ability to read others like an open book and mirror exactly what they wanted to see. But underneath that polished exterior was something far more sinister, a predator who didn't just lie, he became the lie. Over the course of his life, Paul Mack would live under not 1, not 2, but 3 entirely different identities. Each one complete with fake credentials, new histories, and fresh victims. From coast to coast, he evaded law enforcement, reinvented his reality, and left behind a trail of confusion and death. This is not your average true crime story. This is a disturbing case of psychological shape-shifting, where identity became a weapon, and sociopathy wore a suit. Today, we follow the tangled threads of Mack's triple life, exposing how one man weaponized trust, and how justice nearly missed him at every turn. Stay with us, because this tale doesn't just challenge our understanding of crime. It challenges our belief in the people around us. Paul Steven Mack entered the world in 1948, a time when records were easier to manipulate, when trust was often given freely, and when a convincing smile could go a long way. From early on, something about Paul didn't quite fit. He moved through life like smoke, visible, yet impossible to grasp. Those who knew him described him as elusive, guarded, a man who always seemed to be editing the story of his own life in real time. But it wasn't until the 1980s that his most dangerous transformation began to take shape. In Utah, a man by the name of Dr. Paul Gentile emerged. He was everything you'd expect from a respected professional, well-dressed, articulate, confident. He claimed to be a dentist, a specialist with years of experience. He opened a clinic. Patients lined up for appointments. He spoke with authority. He seemed legitimate. And it wasn't just his patients who were charmed. Women were drawn to him irresistibly. He exuded stability and intelligence. He presented himself as a man with ambition, with purpose. He played the part perfectly. Too perfectly. Because here's the chilling truth. There was no Dr. Gentile. The license, fake. The credentials, forged. The clinic, a front. The entire identity had been carefully constructed by Mack, a man who understood just how easily people fall for what they want to believe. He didn't just fabricate a career, he fabricated a persona. A new reality. And those who came too close, those who trusted too much, would come to pay the price. Paul Steven Mack wasn't just running from his past, he was rewriting it entirely. Behind the polished facade of Dr. Paul Gentile lay the truth. And it was far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. The man charming his way through clinics and living rooms was actually Paul Steven Mack. A seasoned deceiver. A man whose past was littered with betrayal, evasion, and most chilling of all, violence. Investigators would eventually discover that Mack's lies weren't limited to his resume or the diplomas on his wall. No, those were just the surface-level scams. The tip of a much darker iceberg. Because Paul Steven Mack lied about everything. Where he came from. Who he was. What he had done. And buried within those lies was a secret no fake identity could fully cover up. In 1981, a young woman named Judy Godia vanished after becoming involved with Mack. At first, it was treated as another tragic disappearance. There was no immediate evidence of foul play. No clear leads. But years later, her remains were discovered charred, discarded, and left to rot in a remote area of California. Judy hadn't just gone missing. She had been eliminated. Burned to obscure the evidence. Dumped as though her life held no value. Forgotten by the man who had once charmed her into his world. And the man responsible. Still walking free. Mack didn't wait for the investigation to catch up. He saw the storm coming and disappeared before the first drop fell. He changed locations, abandoned identities like old clothing, and seamlessly stepped into a new life, somewhere new, under a new name. Like a predator rebuilding his lair, he began weaving a new web, each strand more calculated than the last. And just like that, the killer faded back into the shadows. Beneath the crisp white coat, beneath the polite handshakes and confident jargon of Dr. Paul Gentile, was something no one in that Utah community suspected. The man they knew, the man they trusted with their health and their hearts, didn't exist. He was a phantom. A mask. A performance. The real man, the one hiding behind the credentials and the charming bedside manner, was Paul Steven Mack. And his true identity wasn't just forged on paper. It was built on decades of deceit. He wasn't merely a fraud. He was a fugitive from the truth. A manipulator who turned his entire existence into a stage, cycling through roles, personas, and places with a terrifying ease. And yet, as the police would come to learn, the forged dental degree and fake social security number were the least of his sins. The deeper they dug, the darker it got. They peeled back the layers, expecting to find a small-time con. Instead, they unearthed a man whose past was bloodstained, steeped in violence, covered in the ashes of someone who had trusted him completely. She was Judy Godia. She was young, full of life, and unaware that the man she was seeing, the man who seemed charming, worldly, protective, was capable of the unthinkable. In 1981, she vanished. No struggle. No witnesses. Just gone. For years, her name sat among the missing. A cold case. A question mark. Until her remains were found. Burned. Dumped. Left in the California wilderness like garbage, erased in a final act of cruelty meant to keep the truth buried forever. But murder leaves fingerprints in the soul. And Paul Steven Mack had miscalculated one thing: time doesn't erase truth. And even if you change your name, the past always remembers. It's a question that chills even seasoned investigators. What kind of person can live so many lies, while harboring the capacity for such monstrous acts? Paul Steven Mack wasn't just deceptive, he was strategically deceptive. Every lie served a purpose. Every gesture, every word, carefully calculated. And it wasn't just for survival, it was for control. When psychologists finally got a chance to examine his behavioral profile, one term stood out like a red flag waving in the wind: malignant narcissist. A personality type that blends extreme self-obsession with a total lack of empathy. Someone who doesn't just crave admiration, but demands it, manipulates to get it, and punishes those who deny it. On the surface, Mack was magnetic. People liked him. People trusted him. But behind those rehearsed smiles and thoughtful glances was a hollow man, emotionally barren, pathologically manipulative, and completely devoid of remorse. He didn't feel guilt. He felt entitlement. He believed he deserved affection, obedience, and admiration, no matter the cost. And if someone tried to leave, if they questioned the illusion, the consequences could be fatal. Perhaps the most terrifying weapon in his arsenal wasn't a gun or a knife. It was love. He knew how to simulate it, how to mirror emotions, how to create the illusion of connection. He made people feel special, chosen. And just when they were hooked, just when the trust was complete, that's when the mask slipped. Because to Paul Steven Mack, love wasn't something you gave, it was something you used. A means to manipulate, control, and ultimately destroy. He didn't kill in rage. He killed in calculation. After the brutal end of Judy Goddard's life, Paul Steven Mack did what he did best: he vanished. He slipped through the cracks of the justice system and re-emerged in Ohio, under a familiar alias. Dr. Paul Gentile was back. And just like before, he came armed with polished credentials, practiced charm, and a talent for deception that had only grown sharper. But as investigators would later learn, Mack wasn't content to live in one stolen skin for too long. His lies evolved, just as he did. And soon, Gentile became Dr. Steven Mack, a new identity, slightly closer to the real name but wrapped in the same dangerous illusion. This new persona had connections to both dentistry and law enforcement circles. Think about that. He inserted himself into systems meant to protect the public, all while carrying a predator's intent. The proximity to power gave him a cloak of legitimacy, and perhaps something far more sinister: access. By now, there were whispers. Rumors that Mack wasn't just fleeing his past, but continuing his pattern of destruction under new names. Investigators quietly suspected he might be linked to other disappearances. Women who went missing. Relationships that ended suddenly, with no trace, no body, no goodbye. But suspicion isn't proof. And Paul Steven Mack was always just slippery enough to stay out of reach. Then came 1991. Mack married a woman named Francine Campione. On the outside, they seemed like a stable couple. But underneath, history was repeating itself. Within months, Francine disappeared. No body. No confirmed sighting. Just gone. Another woman swallowed by his shadows. Another life erased by a man who had made a career of disappearance. But Francine left behind something Mack didn't anticipate. A sliver of her voice. A journal. In her own words, she described the fear growing inside her. The unease. The feeling that the man she married was not who he claimed to be. Her entries revealed a woman on edge, desperately trying to make sense of the man she loved, while sensing that something was terribly, terribly wrong. It was her final message to the world. A scream written in ink. And a chilling piece of evidence in the puzzle of Paul Steven Mack. For years, Paul Steven Mack had outwitted the system. He wore his lies like armor, slipping from name to name, state to state, as if no one could ever truly pin him down. But even the most convincing illusions eventually begin to crack. By the late 1990s, time and science finally caught up. A cold case team, re-examining the brutal 1981 murder of Judy Goddard, turned to a relatively new tool in criminal investigations: DNA profiling. The remains that had once seemed silent finally spoke. And what they said was damning. The genetic material matched one man. A man living quietly in Ohio. A man going by yet another false name. A man still presenting himself as a dentist. Still respected. Still trusted. But beneath that thin veneer of legitimacy, he was the same predator. Paul Steven Mack was arrested. His double life unraveled almost instantly. The lies collapsed like a rotting structure: years of false identities, forged documents, and a trail of victims and unanswered questions suddenly exposed. In 2000, Mack was convicted of second-degree murder in Judy Goddard's case. It was a long overdue reckoning. But even in the courtroom, he remained unreadable. Detached. Unremorseful. As though the man on trial was just another character, another mask he could hide behind. He never confessed. never gave closure to Judy's family, and he never stood trial for the disappearance of Francine Campione. With no body and no direct evidence, her case stalled, haunted by the echoes of her journal, but legally paralyzed. Then, in 2002, Paul Steven Mack died in prison. No fanfare, no final confession, just silence. And with him, countless secrets were buried. Unanswered questions sealed forever behind the cold walls of a prison morgue. Did he kill more women? Did Francine suffer the same fate as Judy? We may never know, because the man who lived 3 lives died with the truth locked inside him. So now that the dust has settled, the question lingers like smoke in a closed room. What really drove Paul Steven Mack? Was he a classic narcissist obsessed with control, incapable of empathy, and desperate for admiration no matter the cost? Or was he a full-blown sociopath, cold, calculated, and willing to discard human lives like broken tools once they no longer served his needs? Or was he something even darker? A unique predator, a master of manipulation, a man whose crimes weren't fueled by rage or impulse, but by strategy. Whatever the diagnosis, one thing remains chillingly clear. Paul Steven Mack weaponized identity itself. He didn't just wear masks, he became them. And even when justice finally caught up with him, he slipped away before he could ever truly be unmasked. So we ask you, was justice served? Or did this killer conman still win by taking his secrets to the grave? Let us know what you think in the comments. Do you believe there are more victims out there? More identities he lived under that we'll never uncover? Your thoughts just might help keep stories like this from fading into silence. Paul Steven Mack lived not 1, not 2, but 3 lives. Each carefully crafted, each a new identity to hide behind. But despite the different names, the shifting faces, the reinventions, each life spiraled toward the same grim end. A life wrapped in lies so thick they suffocated the truth. A life marked by relentless control over victims, over those who trusted him, over his own twisted narrative. And most chillingly, a life soaked in blood. Because evil isn't always the monster lurking in the shadows. Sometimes evil wears the smile of a friend. Sometimes it promises healing as a doctor. And sometimes, it comes to you as a husband. Paul Steven Mack was all these things. And behind every mask, behind every whispered lie, there was a darkness we're still trying to understand. If you're fascinated by the twisted minds behind real-life monsters, if you crave the psychology, the forensics, and the deep dives into darkness that most won't dare explore, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to The Crime Keeper for more chilling tales, expert analyses, and investigations that peel back the layers of deception and evil. And don't forget to hit that bell so you never miss a case that could change the way you see the world. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and above all, don't trust too easily.